Good evening, welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom on the show tonight. At almost 47,000, the highest daily cases since the 12th of November, India's latest weekly cases rise faster than the US, Brazil and France. Today, an important announcement. The government says that the interval for the Covishield vaccine can be increased from 4 to 6 weeks to 6 to 8 weeks as new reports come in of the efficacy of the drug. Our first topic, a bigger gap between Covishield jabs. A first jab sooner for citizens, that's what we are asking, because there is an existing stock, therefore, which would have gone to those who are getting their second vaccine shot. If that's now available, then can that be given to more citizens? That's something that so many have said we need urgently. Also on the show tonight, an important new report from Pew Research claims that in the pandemic, India's middle class has shrunk and that poverty has spread. I'll be joined by the Nobel laureate, Dr. Abhijit Banerjee, to look at where COVID has left millions of Indians. Well, joining us now, Doctor, to look at the COVID situation in India. The numbers are now fairly horrific and the entire vaccination process. Dr. Shekhar Mande, Director General of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, Dr. K. Srinath Reddy, President of the Public Health Foundation of India, and Dr. Shashank Joshi, member of the COVID Task Force in Maharashtra. Dr. Joshi, let me come to you first. A few weeks back, many would have thought that we are winning the battle against COVID. Now, it is true that COVID discipline in this country, let's face it, has been a joke. People nowhere in the country have been very serious about it. And yet we seem to be winning. What has changed in Maharashtra which has resulted in this gigantic spurt now?
Vishnu, there are three things very clear. Number one is that this is definitely a faster spreading strain. Whether it is homegrown or outside, we don't know. We need to wait for the genomic data. I said this a month back also on NDTV, and I'm saying it today also. It is faster growing, faster recovery, lower death rate, but that's clearly there. Number two, there is a total lack of COVID inappropriate behavior, whether it is in Mumbai or in Maharashtra or rest of India, that is clearly there.
Yes.
Number three is that Maharashtra was a little lackadaisical in terms of increasing the number of tests. Now they have ramped it up. So the large numbers which you are seeing is because the testing has gone up exponentially now. You can see that Mumbai was testing only 5,000 to 6,000 cases a month back. Today they are testing close to 40,000 cases. Maharashtra was testing somewhere around 25,000 to 30,000 cases a day. Currently they are testing more than 150,000 cases a day. So clearly, and the test, but what is worrying and what is the grim situation is the test positivity rate in many places above 15%. And we need to still do our contact tracing at 1:30. We still need to do our micro containment in a more aggressive way. And I think that's happening, but I think we still need cooperation from citizens at large. Till we don't get that, Vishnu, we will not be able to win the battle. And we still need to vaccinate a larger group and the most vulnerable group as fast as possible. I think vaccinating the most vulnerable group is very, very important. And that's something which we need to recognize.
Dr. Mande, do you accept that this is a new mutant strain, whether it's foreign or Indian, it doesn't matter? Transmissibility has gone up dramatically in India, certainly in Maharashtra?
So as of now, the scientific evidence for that has not been gathered to the same rigor as we would like to. So it is difficult to say that. The genome sequences don't appear to show any emergence of new strain per se. There are the standard mutations that are observed around the world, which are also seen here. So it's difficult to actually scientifically say that it is the R number has gone up or the strain is spreading faster. So we'll have to actually wait to gather the real scientific evidence, and they say definitively that indeed it is spreading faster.
Dr. Joshi, on what basis do you say that there is a new mutant strain?
So we are seeing clusters. For example, in Nanded, we have 8, 10 families getting infected in a span of 1 or 2 days. So if you look at public health strategy and simple logic, clearly we are seeing something, and they are recovering also faster. So by basic common clinical common sense and public health common sense, we clearly know that this is a different strain. Now the genomic scientists are taking their own sweet time. It's more than a month now. We don't have any data, any correlation from them. The labs take extraordinarily long. They take a month to get the reports out. So that is for them to decide whether there is a genomic correlation or not. But I currently feel that there is definitely a strain which is faster spreading. There's no two ways about that, Vishnu. And I would stand to be corrected, but that clearly is there. The scientific rigor, the genomic labs are very limited in our country. They are all with CSIR and they can, and ICMR, and they can get that data out in the times whenever they find the time to show the correlation. But clearly what we observe from clinical observations is very clear-cut that it's a faster spreading strain and it is predominantly asymptomatic. We are seeing a younger population between 20 to 40 getting it and large number of clusters of families. In fact, Nanded virtually had to go into a lockdown. Amravati had the same challenge. And, there was data from BJ Medical College, but that data was too small as a sample size to really make that correlation. 5% of all these cases have to have genomic analysis, and we need more transparency on that data.
Dr. Srinath Reddy, do you believe that there needs to be open transparency on whether or not this mutant strain, whichever one it is the one which is scientifically resulting in more infections? Why has it taken a month already since we started talking about whether it's the UK strain, the Brazil strain, or is it an indigenous strain? Some were found in Nanded, some in another part of the country, of Maharashtra. Why are we still having this conversation now? Should we either accept it or rule it out?
Firstly, the amount of genomic analysis of the samples that are testing positive for the virus, that level of genomic testing must increase. It has already started increasing because of the consortium that was established in December, but unless we get many more, because obviously for every symptomatic case, there are so many asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic cases. So we do not know how fast it is spreading really. But also it is true that over a period of time, these viruses tend to have a trade-off between infectivity and virulence. When they are already exhausting a large number of susceptible people whom they've already infected, and we are creating a little bumpy road for it because of our various public health measures and vaccines, the virus would like to continue its existence, and therefore it increases its infectivity but tends to reduce its virulence. It is possible it's changing its behavior. So, but we ought to track it, and certainly more genomic testing would give us a clear-cut answer as to what is happening to it. But whether it is a mutation or whatever is the change of behavior in the virus, our public health measures will continue to be the same. They are the best defense in terms of masks,
without a doubt, Dr.
physical
Reddy,
distancing, preventing super spreader events.
My only point, Dr. Reddy, and this is without a doubt, social distancing, all the norms, we can repeat that and we will repeat it. But why is it taking so time for us to scientifically rule out something? If this is a mutant strain, what is it called? How is it different? Is it a foreign strain? Is it an Indian strain? Why, if in a country like ours, where we have, for example, this remarkable manufacturing capacity, remarkable medical scientific capability, that we are unable to, in a period of 1 month in the middle of a medical emergency, rule out whether or not this is some sort of higher transmissible strain? Why not from a scientific basis? Why does Dr. Joshi have to say on a clinical basis, I have seen this? Why does Dr. Joshi have to say on a clinical basis, I have seen this? Why can't we have the science as well, Dr. Mande?
It's for me or Dr. Reddy?
Dr. Mande, would you? I think Dr. Reddy's had his bit, and he. I
sure.
just
so
asked
I had written Dr. Joshi.
Where is the science? Why is it
Dr.
taking
Shashank
a month
Joshi,
for the science to emerge?
Yeah, Dr. Shashank Joshi, I have written a personal letter to Maharashtra government about a month ago, and I welcome you to write to me an email immediately after this show, shekhar@csi.res.in, and you start sending me the samples. We'll start giving you results in 48 hours. Right? shekhar@csi.res.in. Please note down my email address. I have written a letter to Maharashtra government about a month ago. I have not heard from Maharashtra government, and will be more than happy to sequence 5% of the positive samples.
That's fantastic to hear, sir. I just wish that this conversation could have happened on another occasion as well. But Dr. Mande, let me ask you this, because here's the other very important development. AstraZeneca, Covishield in India, you've shifted the second dose from 4 to 6 to 6 to 8 weeks. So the basic question which a lot of people are asking, many people have called me today to ask, that I'm a senior citizen, I've had my first dose, will I be more vulnerable with the government pushing my second dose to 6 to 8 weeks? So what would the answer there be?
No. The government has taken a decision based on the fact that the immune response appears to be better if we delay the second dose by about 4 weeks or something, 2 to 4 weeks. So if we actually give the second dose about 6 to 8 weeks, that appears to give better immunity. That's the evidence that is emerging.
But sir, that's long-term immunity, right, sir? Dr. Mande, that's long-term immunity.
whatever immunity, I mean, that's actually
what about short-term immunity? The people who've got their first injection, are they okay to wait for 8 weeks before getting the second one? That's my question.
See,
sir.
Immunity always goes up first dose like this, and then the second dose it goes up like this.
I see.
So basically what we are actually saying is that delaying the second dose appears to actually protect people better. That's what actually the evidence that appears to be there right now.
Sure.
And that's why the expert panel has recommended today that the second dose can be delayed.
Dr. Reddy, do you believe that the first dose now should be given to more citizens? We've got maybe some extra stock because you're delaying that second dose. That stock is presumably available. Therefore, should, say, plus 40s, irrespective of comorbidities, should all plus 40s, for example, get it?
Firstly, let us talk about this dose interval.
Yes.
The largest trial so far, the trial in the United States, whose results have come out today.
Yes, very encouraging.
Had 2 full doses. They are the best results so far. Had 2 full doses given at 4 weeks interval. So they did not extend the interval. However, based on immunogenicity studies, not actually on the clinical trial as much, there is evidence to suggest that you get a better immunity if you delay the second dose. So in order not to confuse people, now that the government has taken a decision, let us say 6 to 8 weeks. That's fine. But obviously, if you're giving it at 6 to 8 weeks rather than at 4 weeks, you will have more vaccines available to give to more people.
Yes.
As the first dose.
No, exactly. And therefore, Dr. Mande, that's my final question to you, sir. Are you going to open this up to more groups? I'm not saying every adult. I'm saying, to a larger cross-section because you have more drugs in hand now.
I'm sure that must be under active consideration. So the vaccine task force, which looks into all these aspects, I'm sure will take a very considered call in the coming few days about expanding the groups and so on and so forth.
Dr. Joshi, one final word, and this is important. In public interest, it's important to perhaps tell our viewers, tell people watching this that this applies for Covishield, 6 to 8 weeks, not Covaxin. Covaxin, the interval remains the same. Would you like to add something to that, sir?
No, absolutely. I think this is one place where all three of us will agree that Covaxin you take at 4 weeks and Covishield you take at 6 to 8 weeks. And I think stick to what the government is saying. Ideally, it would have been 12 weeks, but I think right now this will only lead to more confusion. So even if you take your Covishield at 4 weeks, it is pretty okay. As Dr. Reddy said, just now the Lancet has published a very elegant, and the US has published their data today with 79% efficacy. So whether you take it at 4 weeks, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, it's pretty much okay. I think the government has said defer it by 6 to 8 weeks. It's absolutely in order. Right now what is happening is we don't want vaccine hesitancy. Right. So my last word on this is take the vaccine in the eligible population as early as possible. That's the first thing, because those are the lives we want to save. And if you don't finish that, then you can move to the people between 40 and 45 or 45 to 60 who are not having comorbidities. Okay. Right now, our first target is to save lives. We have to get into a zero mortality. So even in all the pandemic in Mumbai and Maharashtra, the case fatality rate in the last 3 months is only 0.5. So that's the only silver lining with very good recovery rate. And I think vaccination will have some role to play in the death rate. Sure. And that's the bottom line currently at least.
Absolutely. That is I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining us. It's great to have discussions on this and the science of it as well. I need to quickly move on now to another one of our key focal points this evening. Thank you all very much for being with us. An important new report from Pew Research claims that in the pandemic, India's middle class has shrunk and that poverty has spread. In contrast, China has seen considerably smaller changes. Now, given that India and China account for more than a third of the global population, with about 1.4 billion people each, the course of the pandemic will have a huge effect on changes in the global distribution of income. That's what the report says. But there's a lot in it for India, and what it does suggest is quite worrying. Significantly, India is estimated to have seen a greater decrease in the middle class and a much sharper rise in poverty than China during the COVID-19 downturn. Now, this is in line with the World Bank revised growth estimates, which in January revised India's growth downwards to minus 9.6%, but forecast 2% growth for China. But let's focus more on India and how the pandemic may have driven 75 million below the poverty line. That number is huge. Now, According to, and this is just in 2020, according to Pew Research Center's report, the pandemic may have shrunk India's middle class population by a whopping 32 million as the pandemic led to massive job losses. Before the pandemic, it was anticipated that 99 million people in India would belong in the global middle class in 2020. But post-pandemic, this number is estimated to be 66 million, cut by a third, as India plunged into its deepest recession in more than 40 years. In comparison to India, China fared much better. In China, the number of people in the middle income tier decreased by only 10 million. The report is based on an analysis of World Bank data. Well, we've got a superb guest joining us now. It's always a pleasure to interview Professor Abhijit Banerjee, the Nobel laureate. Thank you very much, Professor Banerjee, for being with us. You've had a chance to go through this report. Firstly, the methodology, as I understand it, refers a great deal to, or is based a great deal on, purchasing power parity. Therefore, the numbers are fairly useful, would you agree, in making this assessment of consumption? I just want to understand the methodology.
Yeah, I guess I'm less I'm going to be less charitable to these numbers, I'm afraid. And I think that I do want to make a point there, which is that I think that in somewhere in the small print it tells you that this is all based on assuming that every section of India's population, the poor, the middle class, the rich, the ultra-rich, their incomes grew at the same rate. That seems such an implausible starting point. I mean, so I think these numbers, they're not useless, but they are a bit of just a starting point. And I would say probably, given everything else we know, the fact that, we were producing 1 billionaire a week, I believe, during the same year, 2020, I suspect that means a lot more bad news at the low end. I mean, if just to parse that, if the total pie is all they're basing on is the total pie shrunk by 8.6%, then assume that everybody's income grew at the same negative rate, then you would get these numbers. To me, this means that since everybody's income didn't grow at the same rate, in particular the poor, the income of the rich seems to have ballooned, it must be that the income of the poor fell by much more. I think there's more bad news than this report is disclosing.
But Professor Banerjee, the numbers over here are also huge. The pandemic may have driven 75 million below the poverty line in 2020, is what they're saying. India's middle class population by a whopping 32 million. These numbers are staggering by itself. So the question is this: if this is actually the number, and you suggest that it could be much more, until this is fixed and those who have gone into the poverty level actually come back into lower middle incomes, when will we actually see decent growth in our economy?
I think that the growth question is, in a sense, depends very much on what policies are pursued and what happens now. I think that this is largely a reflection of the fact that the labor markets collapsed and therefore people had no earnings. Now, if the economy has recovered to some extent, it's slow, the recovery, but I think it's slow partly because we still don't have the kind of demand stimulus that we've been arguing for a long time. I think the government has moved in that direction, that there is more and more emphasis on demand, but I still think that the demand in the economy with this kind of a shock, especially the consuming class got clobbered. You would imagine that that's where there's still a demand shortage. We don't see any investment recovery. That's been pointed out by multiple experts that the investment recovery has been slow, and that's not a surprise. I mean, I wouldn't invest in production if it is the case that the market is shrunk.
Professor Banerjee, it's sometimes we get lost in numbers. But just the quality of lives of millions of Indians, which has plummeted during the pandemic, is something which we should perhaps look at. Now, this report says, and I quote, before the pandemic, it was anticipated that 99 million people in India would belong in the global middle class in 2020. A lot of these individuals would have aspired to belong to the global middle class, and they would have achieved that under normal circumstances. But post-pandemic, the number is estimated to be 66 million, cut by a third. They've all fallen back considerably. So the quality of life of millions of Indians is now indefinitely on hold. Would you agree?
I hope not. I mean, I think it depends exactly as I said. It's not that we are in some irrecoverable abyss. It's a matter of the right policies if demand recovers. It's not that we were suddenly, there's something that's happened that changes the nature of the entrepreneurial spirits in India, the ability of the workforce to produce. So I'm still optimistic. I just think that we need good policies and real force behind those good policies, and then I still think that we are capable of growing fast. I just think that we should not take this as our sort of God-given gift that we will grow at these rates. I think we were growing because we had a bunch of good factors going our way. If we take them away, we won't grow.
Okay. Professor Banerjee, why has China, according to this report, fared much better than India during this pandemic?
That's the interesting part. The interesting part is China. China is really the global outlier. And, what they did with the pandemic, they did things that I don't think we could have done. I think there's a sense in which being an authoritarian state allows them to do certain things that we would not have been able to do. So they control the pandemic. I think there is some doubts about Chinese data, but I think given everything else, I think everybody thinks that Chinese did control the pandemic much more effectively and quickly than we did. They controlled it very quickly. As a result, they didn't really have the kind of economic losses we had. I mean, right now, all the news we have is almost that the GDP of China went up and ours went down. And that's really, and everything else is this Pew report is a bit of putting a gloss on that fact. But it's really that, which is that the Chinese manage, and that's true not just relative to us, it's relative to the US, relative to Europe. The Chinese really were a spectacular outlier. Whatever they did to control the pandemic meant that the economy really restarted very, very fast.
One final question. Now, this report says India cut poverty sharply from 2011 to 2019. Now, that is correct. But at the same period, China greatly boosted its middle and upper middle class income populations. Therefore, whatever impact COVID has had on China's economy and its people, a large number, millions, were already one tier higher in terms of income than India. So, therefore, in terms of their quality of life or their income, it's gone down, but not as much as India, where our people were poorer in a sense to begin with.
Yes, and indeed we think that we don't actually know how much poorer, because one of the problems we've had is that since 2016 we've just basically stopped the production of domestic data. We don't, the NSS or various rounds have been rejected by the government. So to the extent that we see any data, in fact we see some evidence of an increasing poverty after 2016. That data was shown briefly and then removed and said that there's a claim that the data is wrong. But I would like to see data. I think without data we can't really have these conversations. That's part of the problem. I don't want to say that it's malified, but I do want to say that we can't have these conversations in air. We're right now having it in air because we don't know what would have happened in 2019, given that we don't have any data really telling us what's happening between 2016 and 2019. I think we really should be, that should be the big message. The big message is we need some real numbers to figure out where we are and what to do.
All right, Professor Banerjee, thank you so much for speaking to us and running us through this report and your thoughts on it. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.